Welcome to the July 2025 edition of What Tim Read This Month. My name is Tim DeForest. I'm one of the co-hosts of the Edgar Rice Burroughs podcast, which is currently on hiatus. So I am taking up my free time by producing these What I Read This Month videos. And, well, let's dive right into the books I read in July of this year. The Revolution's Last Men, The Soldiers Behind the Photographs by Don N. Hagist, or Hagist. I actually don't know how to pronounce his name. Now, in 1864, 6 surviving veterans of the Revolutionary War, all about 100 years old at the time, were photographed. These photos, along with accounts of their war services, were published in a book. The newer book, this book, points out that the accounts from the 1864 volume were faulty. They relied on 90-year-old memories without any fact-checking, and there was no examination of any surviving records. Also, there seemed to be times when a veteran would mention, for instance, the Battle of Saratoga, and the original author would then take this to mean that the veteran was at that battle, even though he might not have enlisted until well after that battle took place. The author of this book is fair-minded. The author of this newer book is fair-minded in pointing out that the purpose of the original book was to inspire patriotism during the Civil War, and that it wasn't practical to travel around checking old documents during the war. But all the same, facts are important, and this new book does check old records to get a more reasonable picture of the veteran's service. So the Revolution's Last Men is a correction of a flawed historical record. But it does point out that even if the experiences of these veterans were not as wide-ranging as originally written, they still served their nascent country honorably when they were needed. So this is a very good history book. I do recommend it. Next, we jump into fiction with Davy Crockett, Sioux Slaughter by David Thompson, which is a pseudonym for David Robbins. And this is a very fun entry in the series. It begins with Davy's wanderlust taking him and his sidekick, Flavius Harris, that's a wonderful name by the way, across the Mississippi to the prairies. A buffalo stampede causes the two men to lose track of each other. Now, Flavius is obviously based on Buddy Ebsen's character from the Disney version of Davy Crockett's life. He has comedic tendencies, but he is competent enough to be viewed realistically as Davy's partner. He's also extremely tender-hearted. He ends up bringing a lost and dangerously playful baby buffalo along with him, defending it from wolves and a grizzly bear while trying to find a buffalo herd to which he can return the beast. In an Androcles in the lion moment, the small buffalo ends up saving Flavius's life later in the book. Meanwhile, Davy is captured by a tribe of Sioux Indians who suspect he's part of a gang of slavers that have been kidnapping Indian women. He escapes, but he soon encounters the slavers. When Davy and Flavius reconnect, they end up in a last stand situation defending 4 Indian women against those slavers. There's a number of great action sequences here, most notably the opening buffalo stampede and the tense violent last stand at the climax. Both Davy and Flavius are fun protagonists, and I look forward to future volumes of this series. Next we have Keith Laumer's novel Time Trap. And I'll begin by quoting a line from the novel. "The whole world?" Roger gasped. "You're going to destroy the planet just to keep your filing system tidy?" And that's Time Trap. It's both a science fiction adventure with a bizarre but internally consistent plot, and a comedy with a number of laugh-out-loud moments. The protagonist, Roger Tyson, is just an average guy who is snatched out of 1987 and ends up traveling to different times. In each location, he and any other humans who already exist there are confined to a small area. If you walk away, you end up back in the same spot within a few miles, even if you're trying to walk in a straight line. Also, time resets itself each day. Each person is trapped in a sort of Groundhog Day loop. That by itself is troublesome. But Roger soon finds out that the situation involves powerful, godlike beings who barely notice lower species such as humans. Also, the powerful, godlike beings are more than capable of messing things up. The universe around Roger becomes more and more complicated, and soon Earth as a whole appears to be in danger. Can Roger, who barely understands what's happening around him, figure out how to save the day? It's a novel that's both exciting and hilarious. The next novel, I'm afraid, was a bit of a disappointment. It's Doctor Strange Nightmare by William Rotsler. It is part of the Marvel novel series that was published in the late 70s and was kind of a precursor to the flood of superhero prose novels that would soon be hitting the bookstores. And Rotsler had written the previous book in this series about Iron Man, and that was like arguably the best in the series. It was a really great superhero novel. So this somewhat plodding Doctor Strange tale is just disappointing. Now, to be fair, it's difficult to translate artist Steve Ditko's superb illustrations of weird alternate dimensions into prose. But even considering that, the book is poorly paced. There's more minor characters than are needed. There's extended flashbacks recounting Doctor Strange's origin and his girlfriend Clea's origin, which seems there just to up the page count. And a sequence that should have been fantastic is Strange walking down an endless hallway looking for Clea, with each door he comes to leading to a different bizarre dimension or alternate reality. It just goes on too long. And Strange's final battle with Nightmare includes more pseudo-philosophy than action. It's not bad overall, but it's disappointing compared to the higher quality of the other books in the Marvel novel series. Fortunately, the next book I read was excellent. Flight of Eagles by Jack Higgins. An American pilot flying with the Royal Flying Corps during World War I marries a German baroness soon after that war ends. They have twin sons, Harry and Max, who, when they grow up, demonstrate the same skill as a pilot as their dad. When the father dies, Harry stays in the U.S. with his grandfather, while Max returns to Germany with the mother. When the Second World War begins, Harry is flying fighter planes as a Yank in the RAF. Max is a fighter ace for the Luftwaffe. The book recounts their wartime adventures, culminating with Harry's capture by the Germans and a plan conceived by Himmler to switch Max for Harry as part of a scheme to assassinate Eisenhower. Max has no desire to be an assassin, but he has to go along with the plan to save both his brother's life and his mother's life, because unfortunately, Max and Harry's mom has made the wrong sort of friends, and she's learning to her horror that her title and her social status will not protect her from the Nazis. This is a typically fun Jack Higgins novel, with a lot of intense action, suspense, and strong characterizations. As is also typical in pretty much every Higgins novel with a World War II setting, he accurately portrays the Nazis as the brutal sadists they were, but he also drops honorable Germans into the story in key roles. This one makes that distinction intelligently. At one point, Max laments that he just wanted to be a pilot, so when the Nazis took over, he just went with the flow without thinking too much about it. He doesn't excuse his culpability in fighting for the Nazis, and he doesn't continue to ignore what he had been fighting for. This adds depth to the characterizations without getting in the way of the pacing or the action. It really is a great novel. Next, we're back to history. This is a book I read for the book club that's a part of the local chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution. The Men Who Lost America, British Leadership, the American Revolution, and the Fate of Empire by Andrew Jackson O'Shaughnessy. And with a name like that, really, he had no choice but to become an historian. And this book is an excellent set of mini-biographies of the key players from the British side of the Revolutionary War. It includes George III, various politicians, and various generals and admirals from the military side of things. It's a slow read because each chapter is dense with information, but it's well written enough to stay interesting. Now, did the British lose because of the mistakes made by these men? The book argues that the continued expectation of large-scale loyalist uprisings in America was a definitive factor. There was never enough troops to conquer territory and then properly garrison that territory. So the help of loyalist citizens was vital, but this help never arose on a large scale. Available troops for the British shrunk after 1778 when France and later Spain entered the war on our side. Other mistakes were made, but the book argues that this assumption of wide-scale loyalist help was an important cause of the eventual British loss. as was the fact that their supply line ran 3,000 miles across an ocean. Political shenanigans back in England were often counterproductive as well. The book also points out that the British underestimated the capabilities of the American soldiers. This was very chronic, at least early in the war. And the book also takes time to remind us that George Washington's leadership was key to our eventual victory. Some of the men we meet are admirable and sometimes quite likable. General Cornwallis was a pretty cool guy in a lot of ways. Some were jerks. Admiral George Rodney pretty much just abandoned Cornwallis at Yorktown because he was busy in the Caribbean illegally selling loot from a Dutch port he had captured. But good guys or jerks, this book makes all of them interesting and adds to our appreciation of how the history of the United States is often fascinating and very multifaceted. So from real history, we dive into Gotham City in the 50s, Batman in the 50s, by various writers and artists. And I love the 50s era of Batman. They were silly, they were over the top, they often use bizarre science fiction premises that one can legitimately don't really fit into the style of stories that should be Batman stories. But by golly, they were fun. In this volume, we see Batman use countless variations of his costume. Countless gadgets. How many different versions of the Batarang can a utility belt possibly hold? And countless different vehicles. We meet the first Batwoman. We read the first Mr. Zero, later renamed Mr. Freeze story. We watch Two-Face become sane, only to go nuts again. And we discover the origin of the Joker. Batman travels into the future, he visits a planet where he has superpowers, and he calls on the help from Batmen of other countries and or other times. It's not really Batman as he should be. See the 1970s O'Neil Adams stories for that. But the world would be a poorer place if we hadn't been given the 50s Batman as well. Next, we have a great hard-boiled novel, The Dark City by Max Allan Collins. This is an Eliot Ness mystery. And it's the first of 4 novels featuring Ness in a fictionalized but still very well-researched account of his time as safety director for the city of Cleveland. This is post-Untouchables, so Ness has made a name for himself in helping take down Capone and in being honest. So the new mayor of Cleveland asks him to take on the Herculean task of cleaning up a corrupt police department and cracking down on rampant crime. So Ness is stuck with a job where he can't trust many of the cops who work under him. He allies himself with a local investigative reporter, and using funds provided by local businessmen, he hires some private detectives. This includes Nathan Heller, who stars in a series of equally excellent novels by the same author. Gradually, Ness begins to make progress in busting some gambling dens. But he has to find the, quote, other police chief, unquote, the man who has turned several precincts full of corrupt cops into a thriving criminal organization. And he has to work fast. He has to show headline-making results in order to get the city council on his side. So Ness does find several cops he can trust. Well, cops he can probably trust. Ness makes for a great protagonist, and the book drips with a strong, hard-boiled atmosphere, while it moves the story along in a fast-paced and logical manner. It really is a great book. As with the Davy Crockett series, I'm looking forward to reading the rest in this series. Then we have The Best of Manhunt, Volume 3. We're sticking with hard-boiled stories here. And Manhunt was the go-to magazine in the 1950s for top-shelved hard-boiled stories. So, not surprisingly, this anthology is crammed full with great stuff. And picking out favorites from this is very subjective, since every story in it really is good. But for me, the standouts include Old Willie by William B. McGivern. This is set in Capone-era Chicago. It's the tale of a gangster, a misused woman, and a janitor who surprises everyone. And it instantly became one of my favorite short stories of all time. How Much to Kill by Michael Zuro is a strong tale of greed and murder with a study of just how much a man's life is worth to different people. The Big Haul by Robert Page Jones is a heist yarn in which, not surprisingly, things go wrong with the plan. There's an excellent twist ending. And Vegas and Run by Don Lowry, which is structured like a heist story in a way, except the 2 lead characters have a plan for cashing in $100,000 worth of counterfeit traveler's checks, When their plan goes awry, they find themselves on the run from both the cops and the mob. We have one that I've reread countless times, The Guns of Navarone by Alistair MacLean. When I was a teenager, Alistair MacLean was perhaps my favorite author. When Christmas approached, I could give my parents a list of MacLean novels I already owned and tell them they could get me any not on the list as a present. You know, his early novels were among his best. In fact, sadly, most of the novels he wrote in the late 70s and the 80s weren't very good. He had pretty much lost his mojo late in his career. I understand he had problems with alcoholism. But when he was on track, he was a magnificent storyteller. I just reread his second and perhaps his most best-known novel, The Guns of Navarone. It's from 1957. Here is MacLean at his very best. The plot seems straightforward. A commando team must infiltrate a German-held island of Navarone in the Aegean Sea and blow up a couple of whopping big guns. This must be done by a certain date to allow a naval squadron to pass by the island without getting blown out of the water. The guns are in a cliffside cavern that's impervious to air attack. But MacLean introduces all sorts of twists and turns into the story. First, to get to the island, the commandos must scale a theoretically unscalable cliff at night during a storm, as it turns out. Then they must dodge German search parties after the enemy gets lucky and discovers they're on the island. They get captured and have to improvise an escape. They get shot at, dive-bombed, and shelled, but by golly, they keep going. In addition to that, there's a whodunit element involving exactly how the Germans are getting information about the commandos. All of this, added on top of the time pressure to get the mission done, make the novel truly exciting from start to finish. Guns of Navarone is in many ways a template for the later MacLean novels, with the best of them nearly overflowing with unexpected plot twists and surprises. And MacLean's characters are fun to hang out with. The leader is Keith Mallory, given the job because he's an expert mountaineer as well as an experienced commando. His right-hand man is Andrea, a huge Greek who's both intensely humane and a nigh unbeatable warrior at the same time. MacLean often included supporting characters who are big and indefatigable in strength and endurance. Andrea is probably the most memorable of these. Their explosive expert is an American named Dusty Miller. MacLean really does overdo Miller's Western drawl, but the character is still likable. And one can argue that the drawl helps mask just how smart and capable Miller is, making some of his later actions in the novel an effective surprise. Now, the 1961 film, in that film, relationships were changed radically, though the film still follows the basic plot fairly closely. Mallory and Andrea, for instance, were changed from best friends to deadly enemies. Andrea is planning on killing Mallory once the war is over and they're done killing Germans. It's a complete 180 from their relationship in the book. The film is meant to have more of an anti-war theme, so the change and other character changes were made to highlight this. And the film really is a classic. It's exciting and visually stunning. But I would argue that it doesn't pull off the anti-war theme at all. Francois Truffaut once said that it's impossible to make a truly anti-war film because movies will invariably make the action seem exciting. And that's particularly true in this film version of The Guns of Navarone. Both the book and the film make strong points about the brutality of war and the necessity of leaders to make decisions that will cost lives no matter what. The film also adds points about how war can break people emotionally. But in the end, the film succeeds too well in making everything about the mission look awesome. When those guns blow up, we're not thinking, what a horrible experience this has been. Instead, we're thinking, oh man, that's cool. And we're subconsciously wishing we'd been on the mission as well, fighting alongside Mallory and Andrea. And maybe that's okay. Heck, if real life intruded too far into most adventure stories, there'd be no sense in telling them. Most of us will never be given the job of blowing up Nazi cannon. And that's just as well because most of us would really stink at that job. But there's no reason we can't blow them up vicariously through the bravery and cleverness of Mallory and Miller and Andrea. And we can do this via the novel, the movie, or even the mind-numbingly cool Marx toy playset that came out in the early 60s. Next, we come to Six Men of Evil, published in the Shadow magazine in a February 1933 issue. And this is a weird one. Even in the context of the Shadow's often weird universe. There's 6 men After there's 6 men, and after an attempt to steal a priceless jewel from a remote Indian tribe in Mexico, they end up with identical faces. They plan to use this to commit crimes, helping each other establish perfect alibis for their crimes and framing somebody else for them. Within a few chapters, they've murdered a man, they've stolen some valuable bonds, they've embezzled money from a bank, they've pulled off a marry the rich girl then murder her scheme, and they've put 3 innocent men in jail accused of these various crimes. The crimes take place in different locations around the country, so at first nobody connects them. Well, except the Shadow, who notices the pattern. Each time, the person arrested for the crime accuses somebody who then turns out to have a perfect alibi. The master of mystery deduces that the real criminals use doubles, though he doesn't at first know how this is possible. The Shadow and his agents investigate. He eventually finds out how they all ended up with the same face, a process that would strain credulity in a more realistic universe, but makes perfect sense in a pulp universe. He also discovers how the mastermind communicates with the other members of the gang, using this to track them down just as the next crime is about to be committed. This leads to an awesome car chase and the apparent death of the ringleader. But the Shadow knows all. There's one last confrontation with the surviving men of evil taking place in San Francisco's Chinatown. The novel's a little lighter on action than most other Shadow tales, but it still includes several great action moments. And the mystery is a good one, with the Shadow using clever and logical methods to track down the bad guys and figure out how they somehow became identical sextuplets. The villains overlay the novel with a strong weirdness that works quite well, and giving this one an eerie individuality amongst the other Shadow novels. Next we come to Man the Fugitive by George Alec Effinger, a Planet of the Apes novel. And this is actually 2 novellas rather than a single novel, as the book adapts 2 episodes from the short-lived 1974 TV series. So, both of these episodes follow the series' usual template. Verdon and Burke, the time-lost astronauts from the 20th century, along with their chimpanzee friend Galen, use their astronaut training to teach either humans or apes new things, working through a lot of character-driven melodrama before leaving the area one step ahead of Urko, the human-hating gorilla. In the first story, they help a human village beset by malaria. In the next, they stay with an ape family of farmers while Galen's injured leg heals, overcoming short-sighted prejudice to teach the family better farming techniques and help a pregnant cow through a difficult delivery. Now, a lot of us fondly remember the series, and there's good reason for this. The actors and the production values were good, and the writing was solid within the limitations of budget and network standards. I could still watch and enjoy a rerun of this. But if I remember correctly, the series came on when TV networks were on an anti-violence kick. If I'm correct in remembering this timing, then I think that limited the writers of Planet of the Apes, forcing them to concentrate on soap opera melodrama a little too frequently. Effinger does a solid professional job of adapting these stories into prose, but what he had to work with was very light on action, and inevitably it means some of these stories plod along a little too slowly. I don't regret reading this, and I plan to continue reading the 3 remaining books that adapt television episodes, but I doubt I'll ever revisit them. Next, we finally come to an Edgar Rice Burroughs novel. I can't believe I went several months without reading one of them. And The Chessmen of Mars is my favorite of Burroughs' Martian novels, and one of my favorite novels in his entire canon. John Carter's daughter, Tara of Helium, is a bit of a spoiled brat. After rejecting the proposal from a local king, Gayan of Gathel, she takes her first-person flyer out and inadvertently gets caught in one of Barsoom's rare storms. She's carried thousands of miles off course and ends up a prisoner of the Kaldanes. Now, who are the Kaldanes? They are spider-like creatures about the size of a man's head. And this is a convenient size because they're able to attach themselves to the headless human creatures called Rykors and take control of the Rykor body. Eventually, Gayan of Gathol arrives to rescue her. Because he's not dressed in his usual ornate harness, he's able to pass himself off as a common soldier. The two do escape, and they take a Chaldean named Gek with them, Tara having befriended Gek while she was a prisoner. Now, this sequence, covering the first third or so of the novel, is wonderfully imaginative in of itself. The Geck is a great character who often uses his ability to detach his head from his body in clever ways, outwitting or just freaking out his enemies. The trio end up in the isolated city of Manitor, where escapes, captures, and rescues come at a fast and furious pace. Manitor, with the preserved corpses of its dead mounted on rooftops, and the Martian version of chess, called G10, played with live people who fight to the death on a large board, is yet another example of superb world building. Now, it's no spoiler to reveal that the spoiled Tara eventually admits she's in love with someone she thinks of as a commoner, because, of course she does. But her final rescue, just before she's forced to marry the evil king of Manitor, includes some unexpected twists. So imaginative world building combined with great characters and action sequences form what I really do think is the best of the Martian novels. I'm sorry that Burroughs never had opportunity to use Geck the Chaldean in a story again. Back to the DC universe. I do love Marvel Comics as well. It's just the trade paperbacks I read this month happened to both be DC. And this is Crisis on Multiple Earths, Volume 3. These feature the Justice League of America, Justice Society of America crossovers that took place once a year in the Justice League of America comics in the 1960s, 70s, and into the early 80s. And these crossovers were always a ton of fun. In this volume, with the stories from the 1970s, one team-up involves an alien kid and his pet, who get separated. One's sent to Earth 1, where the Justice League exists. The other is sent to Earth 2, both on a rampage as they desperately look for one another. Two other stories in here revive Golden Age characters. The Seven Soldiers of Victory are key characters in one team-up, while the Freedom Fighters, which is a group made up of very obscure Golden Age heroes, get JSA help in defeating the Nazis, who on the Earth of the Freedom Fighters have won World War II. It's really great fun. Fast-paced, wasting no time in diving into the plot, and full of unabashedly comic-booky plot twists. Next we have The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle, because one must reread the original Sherlock Holmes canon on a regular basis. It's just what people should do. And my favorite of the four Sherlock Holmes novels, the four original novels, and it's Sign of the Four is a very close second. Doyle not only gives us an excellent detective novel that allows Holmes to shine as a deductive genius, but he also gives us a scary, atmospheric tale of gothic horror. The two genres are melded together perfectly to bring us one of the best mysteries ever written. And finally, another classic mystery. I finished with a reread of Murder on the Orient Express. And this classic is probably the most methodically constructed of Agatha Christie's mysteries. Hercule Poirot is traveling on the Orient Express when the train gets stuck in a snowstorm. So when another passenger is murdered, and there's no footprints in the snow outside, it's apparent that one of the passengers must be the killer. There are confusing aspects to the murder. The victim has multiple stab wounds, most of which made with a right hand, but at least one of which was made with a left hand. The wounds were delivered with various degrees of force. And there's a few other clues that all point to different suspects. What makes the book so methodical is that Poirot interviews the suspects one or two at a time. So we get each of their stories plainly laid out to us. Whether any one story is true, of course, is an open question. In other words, once the murder is committed, the evidence is clearly laid out for we readers as well as for Poirot. What's important this time is sorting out fact from fiction and coming up with a theory that fits the facts. Now, it's been so long since I first read this book, I honestly can't remember how surprising I found Poirot's solution to the crime to be. In fact, I may have seen the 1974 film version before I first read the book. But I do think it rivals Murder of Roger Ackroyd in just how unexpected that solution would be to a new reader. This is truly a Christie classic. And that's it. That's what I read in July of 2025. I'll be back next month with a list of those books I read in August. And thank you, everybody, for listening.